My name is Sahir Azam. I work for a software company, an enterprise tech company called MongoDB. And I get to be the boring enterprise B2B tech guy that gets to talk about all the fun tactics that Laura and Dan talked about and how I brought those into a company to transform it from largely an enterprise-centric company to a company that serves all customers of all sizes worldwide through a cloud model. So, just a little bit of context. I know it's obviously very cliche and well understood in the market and the world today that almost every business somehow relies on software. The part that may not be as obvious is every important, meaningful piece of software relies on data. And one way of looking at it is every pretty UI, interaction, mobile app that you've got in your phone, in your pocket, is ultimately serving the purpose of taking some piece of information, combining it with another, and surfacing it to the right person at the right time. That's in some way, shape, or form what all applications are charged with doing. And underneath that, every single application has a boring piece of technology called a database. Now, a couple interesting facts. The database market is arguably the largest market in all of software. It's about, I don't know, somewhere between $50 and $60 billion today. If you believe the pundits, going to 90 to 100 in the next 3 years. So it's massive. But it's also one of the most entrenched markets in the world. You know, it's largely been dominated by two vendors, maybe three, the largest being Oracle, who have been built on technology that was fundamentally designed and architected 40 years ago. And that technology is really good, actually. It's stuck around for a long time. They still make billions and billions of dollars off of that traditional relational database model. It is the foundation for many of the things, many of the applications, many of the businesses that you use every day. The problem with that legacy, the problem with that foundation was, if you built an application or a database technology 30 or 40 years ago, it was never meant to handle the types of applications we use today. The modern mobile applications, social applications, high-scale web applications that we use day in and day out, either at work or in our personal lives. They were built in a world before the cloud. They were built in the world before mobile devices even existed, and in many cases before even the internet. So what MongoDB initially did was try to take on this monumental task of disrupting this very entrenched giant market out of New York City of all places by building the first non-relational database technology for mission-critical applications. The company is an open source company. We launched our initial version of our software 10 years ago, made it free to the world, and it really just took off very much from a community-driven model, similar to what Laura was talking about last, and quickly rose to be the number 4, number 5 largest database technologies in the world. And if you look at the top 10 database technologies worldwide, Mongo is the only one that's less than 10 years old. So kind of crazy monumental adoption in the world. Now, the adoption and usage and success of the technology in terms of living behind the applications that drive your businesses or power the apps in your pocket doesn't mean that building a business off the back of that was simple. And for the first 7 or 8 years of the company, since the company's inception, a big part of that focus was on figuring out how to monetize this massive adoption of our free software, when the majority of our IP is given away for the world to use without paying the company that writes that IP, the technology, a cent. And what we realized was ultimately that wasn't enough, and that in 2016, we made a pretty bold move, raised another round of funding, built out a huge new engineering organization to really start to expand the company from a open source software company selling proprietary technology to large enterprise to really becoming a cloud platform company. So what I'm going to go through is some of the fun learnings and challenges of doing that. But just to put a little bit of a capstone on the beginning of this, this has been a transformational journey and force for the company. So this product that we call Atlas, which is our cloud platform, was actually launched 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago in 2016. At that time, it was obviously 0% of our revenue because it didn't exist. And now it's actually up to 35% of our revenue. Now, you may say 35%, that's not really a big number. What are you talking about, man? But if you think about that 35%, that's a $150 million run rate business in 3 years, compared to an enterprise software business that's also growing best in class compared to any other enterprise software in the world. So it's really important to understand we weren't, and I didn't come in to try to pivot the company hard towards a cloud strategy because our core software business was struggling. It was really to say, we've got one rocket ship, how do we bolt on another one that's completely different in the business model, engineering efforts, the marketing approaches, the channel strategy and distribution strategy, and do that at the same time as not screwing up the stuff that's already working. Now, there's a few different ways that this has affected the business. First and foremost, it's allowed us to monetize as a company a much larger piece of the pie of our user base, of our community. And I'll walk through the details of kind of the nuances of why that's true. The second is it's also expanded our channel strategy. I'll touch upon a couple of the reasons why later, but 3.5 years ago, the vast majority of MongoDB's revenue came from a very expensive and savvy enterprise sales force spread around the world, closing big deals in the Fortune 500, Global 2000 accounts of the world. Even though our technology, our database, was used at startups worldwide by prototypers and developers all across the world, we were really only making money from kind of the top of the market. This has significantly changed our distribution strategy. Like all SaaS businesses, it's allowed us to become much more targeted in the way we engage with our customers. So even though we have 40 million people using our database worldwide, our marketing database historically, prior to Atlas, was probably only a couple million people. It's all anonymous. We don't necessarily have a connection to our community and our end user base, at least not through digital means. We do our obviously worldwide events, but really having a close handle of how they use our technology has been really hard for us. And finally, it's transformed the way we actually build products. I'll get to this at the end, but really the idea that now we've been able to accelerate our engineering execution because we now know exactly how that technology is being adopted, and we've actually increased the velocity of our feature development because of the fact that we've pivoted the company to a cloud business. So I'll double click on a few of these different things in detail, but to really understand the cloud transformation, the first thing I want to touch upon is how MongoDB historically made money and still what is the majority of our revenue, which is a product we call Enterprise Advanced. So the way this typically works, the way our funnel works is millions of developers worldwide know MongoDB. They download it from our website. They download it from a variety of different open source and software repositories or AWS's website and other places, and they start building their application on the backs of MongoDB. We don't know who they are. That application goes through multiple phases of development, prototyping, testing, and ultimately gets to production. And production is obviously where it's serving live actual users. The challenge for us as a business is the majority of our IP is in that core database. We give it away for free because that's the model that drives our funnel for the long term. So how do we actually go make money off the top of that adoption? And the answer to that has always been proprietary technology really aimed at production users, typically in large enterprise. So this is things like advanced security features that large banks or insurance companies or government might need. This could be operational tooling that helps people back up their data, monitor their data to make sure their database is running healthy, upgrades, all the boring stuff it takes to actually run an application. The problem with this is an expensive, heavyweight piece of software. It works really well if you're a really giant bank and you're Morgan Stanley or Barclays Bank or the CIA, and you've got teams dedicated to managing and running databases. But if you're an innovative startup, 5 people, small DevOps team, you don't have the budget or dollars to necessarily buy this type of technology. It's not meant for you. That's why it's called Enterprise Advanced. It's got this big elephant-like name to it. But the challenge for this is how do we now fully optimize against that $60 billion market opportunity that I talked about? And the answer was not go find more enterprises. It was really saying, how do we monetize down market? And that's why we built Atlas. And the dynamic here is really different. For one, we can now actually capture dollars from our user base all the way from the inception of an idea in that application all the way through production. Right? So now a developer can start on our free tier. Our marketing database has grown 5x because now instead of developing with their free version on a laptop, they're signing up for the free tier in the cloud. So we now know who they are. We know how they're using the product. And as they scale that app all the way through to serving hopefully millions of users, they're growing with us. They're adopting more capabilities, their scale's getting bigger, and we're monetizing that entire sort of area under the curve instead of just really the end part of it in production. So we've really expanded sort of our addressable market opportunity even within our own user base. And that's number one. The second is, we were, like as I mentioned earlier, largely a single channel business. Heavyweight, expensive enterprise sales force, which is still a massive lever for growth for us. But that's it. We had an inside sales team, but the economics weren't really there because the product market fit for this enterprise software in the mid-market or in the SMB really wasn't that strong. And we had, in the SMB or the long tail of the market, everyone was just using our software for free. So how do we now build a channel strategy and a distribution strategy that matches this opportunity? That was a big part of our initial thinking when we launched Atlas. So the reality is that as we scaled from enterprise to more of a broad-based inside sales as well as a self-service channel, we've been able to actually monetize thousands and thousands of customers. So what this chart actually shows is the light green is the number of customers that we've been able to engage with over the last few years through our high-touch sales model. And you can see it's growing. These are high-spending accounts, so there's definitely a lot of revenue there. But the number of customers is still a little less than 2,000 probably worldwide. But if you look at the customers we're now able to capture and monetize of all different sizes, everything from $5 a month all the way through hundreds, if not millions of dollars, we're now up to almost 15,000 paying customers in a span of 3 years. So it took us 7 years to get to 600. It took us 3 more years to get to 15,000. So that's the massive sort of expansion of our distribution strategy and sort of how it's played out in the business. But that wasn't easy. I mean, it's easy to look back and fun charts with numbers up and to the right in retrospect. But at the time, 3 years ago, this was a really big challenge for the company. And there was a lot of internal resistance. First and foremost, within the sales organization, where all of our revenue was coming from, and definitely a very important constituency to our business, like any business, there was a lot of fear. There was fear that, okay, now if a developer can come online, just like Amazon or Google or Azure, and just swipe a credit card, start using the database for cents an hour, all the way up through potentially as much as they want to spend on a credit card, what is the role of sales going forward? There was a lot of fear around that, and therefore they put blinders on. Didn't pay attention to the cloud product at all. If anything, actively tried to subvert it in some cases. The second was they were, in many ways, a victim of their own success. Like, as I mentioned, our enterprise software business is still growing, the software side of things, quite aggressively. So the most successful reps who are making a lot of money, having great accolades and internal recognition, they're saying, why do I have to learn something new, especially something that's got this dynamic of a self-service business and it's got a weird pricing model and all this sort of stuff. I can just keep selling the stuff I know, right? So it's just that entrenched, I'm already successful, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And the last, even though MongoDB in many ways has been synonymous with the rise of the cloud with Amazon and the like over the last 10 years, as an organization internally, we were relatively nascent in our understanding of the dynamic of how our software is actually used in the cloud. Because we don't have that community connection, right? People are downloading our software, they're installing it, and they're running it with their own teams, but we're not actually watching that adoption. We're not a cloud company at that point. So a big part of my job, my team's job in the early days, was probably putting around 250,000 miles on our frequent flyer accounts, literally going around the world to every sales team, to every segment of the company, and just training them on this is the dynamic of why the company needs to go this direction, how this isn't actually going to cannibalize the sales team's revenue opportunity, and really beat that drum over and over and over again. Now, the good thing is we got over that hurdle, right? Now there's complete buy-in with the sales organization. And the first thing we had to do to really make that work was closely manage the channel conflict. So this required a lot of interesting conversations between our CFO and I at the time around the fact that, listen, if somebody's got a credit card covering an account and there's credit card usage, that the sales team should be able to go upsell and actually expand that account in a way that's beneficial to the business, but also at the same time, we're not paying heavy sales commission for revenue we already have. And tuning that took a few quarters. Like, we had to figure out exactly the right comp models, the incentive structures, because I know that there were many accounts that weren't ever going to come in necessarily through a credit card, so we still needed that outbound sales focus. So how do we have the sales team closing and hunting new deals and new accounts, and not just cannibalizing and upselling the self-service business, but at the same time, where there's opportunity, we definitely want account management on an important customer, because they may start out at $5 a month or $100 a month, but they could be spending $100,000, $300,000 within a year if we give them the right help. So tuning those sales incentives was really important. The second was just getting the sales team, especially our inside sales team, to understand that self-service was not a threat to their ability to drive revenue and make money. It was actually a lever for them. So at this point, about 30-ish, roughly, % of our inside sales revenue comes from expansion and upsell of our credit card base. So they know how to hunt for the right signals within the thousands and thousands of customers that are paying us on a credit card to find the accounts based on Clearbit and other information that have a high propensity to spend, focus their time there. They know the value prop to grow that customer into a committed contract, expand them much more aggressively than they would organically. So they've recognized that self-service is not their enemy, it's actually their friend. And finally, now that we've had a few years behind us, they all now generally recognize all the way up to the leadership that when selling a deal in the cloud, the sales cycles are about a third faster, and the deal sizes are actually larger as well. So now there's buy-in. There's that shift in mindset that this isn't the thing I should be scared of that disrupts the way I'm doing things, the way I know how to make money. This is now the lever to which I can overachieve. And this makes it sound really easy, but there were many, many, many quarters of iteration and working with the sales leadership, the executive leadership on tuning incentives, on overpaying early for cloud deals to get that tipping point over the hurdle, and then we were able to obviously pull it back when we realized that the flywheel had started. Now, a couple interesting things that helped along the way. One, the largest deal in the company's history, a very large 7-figure transaction, had historically, that size of deal had been associated with a very senior account executive in the field in New York or London or somewhere, working with a big bank, taking down a multi-year large transaction. But since the advent of Atlas, actually some of our largest deals, in fact, the largest deal in the company's history was done by a 23-year-old inside sales rep who had just 6 months earlier transferred from a customer success role into his first quota-carrying role. And he was able to close a multi-million-dollar transaction, albeit upselling a customer, large gaming company. And so that opened a lot of eyes. That got a lot of the attention of our senior enterprise sales team saying, wait a second, hold on, how did this 23-year-old inside sales rep just close the biggest deal in the company's history? So there were some tidbits like that really helped. Secondly, we were at one point where inside sales, we didn't even know if it would work, because we had this heavy enterprise product and we were trying to sell it to small companies that didn't have the teams or budgets necessary to support it. Now that dynamic completely changed. The economics and the productivity of our inside sales team is through the roof. In fact, the biggest challenge we have right now is just hiring and scaling operationally that team as fast as we possibly can. And that is now really, our inside team is a cloud-first sales team. The only software they sell is just upsells of historical existing customers. Everything going forward is almost all new bookings, all new deals are all Atlas or other cloud services. And finally, excuse me, I talked a little bit about this earlier. There's a lot of expansion happening off the credit card base. So as our growth marketing team scales up and drives thousands and thousands of customers or millions in the free tier into the self-service base, now the sales team knows exactly how to get the right product signals from that base to understand how to territory manage and add those to their books to be able to go scale those customers over time. So compared to 3 years ago where it was Cloud 101, and I don't know why we're doing this Atlas thing, it just doesn't make sense to our company, to now really having the full buy-in of our sales organization kind of driving this, that's really what's driving that flywheel, those slides I showed earlier. Now, I have one fun example of this. So we have a very regimented pipeline generation sort of culture within our sales organization where they're not only relying on inbound sales marketing leads, they're really tasked with creating their own pipeline as well. And this is an example of a inside sales rep, I believe, who would send 4 emails. This is to an existing customer, right? They're paying, I don't know, a couple $100, a few $1,000s on a credit card maybe. And he's trying to reach out, get them engaged and say, hey, I can help you out. Let me see if we can tune your environment, get you some more advanced technology packages, get you some account coverage to get you help. Crickets, standard rep reach out. He decided to pay a little bit more attention to the data that was given to him in his new fancy Atlas Tableau dashboards and noticed that this customer had gone from a relatively steady state of growth to a sudden spike. Within a few minutes, he sent an email that was much more targeted saying, listen, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to understand why your usage is spiking. We've seen scenarios where people are spending that kind of ramp and it's actually they're doing something wrong. We can help you actually save costs potentially. Just let me know if I can get you some technical help. Within 15 minutes, the guy responded, said, actually, we're testing a new project. We would love your help and potentially even purchasing professional services from you to help launch this new application the right way. So this is just a very simple, basic example, but it's powerful in that it shows the dynamic of how our high-touch resources, our inside sales team, our enterprise sales team, our support organization, our customer success organization, use this real-time product data to now engage with customers in a much more efficient way. It makes the customers happier, it's easier for us to scale, they can have a much more valuable conversation. Now, I talked a lot about sales, but this change has also been driven across almost every other function of the company. So I wanted to touch upon that a little bit. First, and one of the biggest areas has been marketing. We had a very traditional kind of functional enterprise software marketing organization, a very heavy long-term commitment and focus on community. That's what drove that initial adoption of our open source product, but largely it was from then on qualifying MQLs on large enterprises that might pay us money on apps that had already been deployed. We really needed to change the culture, the org structure, and the focus of the marketing organization because we now have a sizable self-service business. And the way we market to developers who we hope come in, sign up for a free tier, swipe their credit card, expand over time, is much more like a B2C model than it is a traditional B2B model. So we had to bring in new leaders who had come from B2C companies, who had built effective growth marketing strategies across the entirety of the funnel. We reorganized the marketing organization to roll in much more closely to product management so we can look at the funnel end to end from the very top of the funnel all the way through how we convert the customers through that funnel and ultimately expand and retain them and measure both those teams, both the kind of post-registration product side teams and the marketing teams with the same goals in an integrated way. And we needed to really rebuild our tech stack. And in many ways, we had some of the right technology, but we had not invested enough in integrating those technologies at all. So we had no idea how to tell that which campaigns were running, which pages somebody hit, what the profile of that customer was to route them through the right segment all the way through to the product. Even though we had snippets of information along that journey, it wasn't connected. So we invested a lot in things like Segment and other technologies to integrate that funnel and get that visibility end-to-end horizontally. Because prior to that, the marketing organization was really just looking at their slice of metrics. The demand gen team's looking at campaigns, the digital team's looking at impressions. And we broke all that down and started measuring everyone on revenue for the self-service business. And that has been a culture change, a process change, and a technology change. It also has significantly changed our finance organization. So if you look at sort of our historical business, it's largely upfront cash-committed contracts. With our cloud business, yes, some customers are comfortable doing that. They may say, yeah, I'm an insurance company. I know I need to spend $500,000 on this. Here's a check. I'll just use it and draw down on that. But more and more so, customers are attuned and conditioned to a pay-as-you-go model, right, which is all consumption-based, based on the amount of hours or data or transactions or whatever else it is they might be using. So to really change all of our internal financial systems and then also get our organization comfortable with the fact that, listen, any one customer's usage may actually be variable. It's not always just going to be expanding on some sort of step change expansion curve. It may actually dip. And that we may want to invest in teams that help those customers optimize that and maybe even compress their spend for the short term because we know they're going to trust us more and bring more workloads over time. That took a lot of guts and courage in the early days. Ultimately, now the data is there to show that in aggregate that pays off. But it's changed every internal revenue metric, financial system to be able to move from, a lot of times you hear stuff in the market around perpetual to subscription. That's hard enough, but there's a whole other change happening, which is subscription software to consumption-based software. And that is just as challenging as that initial change from perpetual to subscription. I was lucky that MongoDB was already in that second bucket, a subscription software company, but the ramifications of subscription to consumption is something we're still working through. The way we think about rep compensation, the way we think about cash flow in the business, how we think about contracts of different sorts, it's added a lot of nuance and complexity to that. And the last point, all of this change has happened since the company went public in 2016. So trying to make all these changes carefully while not disrupting the growth of the business and our quarterly financial projections and do that, not in a way that we can stop and pivot has been interesting, for sure. But I actually think it makes us a healthier company for it because we're bringing the entire company along for that journey. Whoops, what happened? One more time. Sorry. bear with me. All right, the last is in engineering. I touched upon this really lightly earlier. Come on, clicker. We've changed the way our engineering organization not only is organized, but the way they build product. And this is nothing that surprising, but it actually has big ramifications for a company whose R&D spend is one of our biggest components. I mean, we build a database. If it goes down, an application goes down, our customers yell at us for a really long time. So we spend hundreds of millions of dollars. We have hundreds of engineers just focused on building this technology. Number one, we can now collect deep granular information about usage that we can never get before. Because in a traditional model, obviously, we're shipping our software. We only get that information over the phone in a support ticket. Maybe we have a services team on site that's collecting some of that information for a week, maybe 2. Now we get all this information in real time. That allows us to build a much more targeted roadmap. Because now we can actually start to A/B test new capabilities. We can release it to a segment of our funnel and not the entire thing. We can make sure that it's well received before we blow it out to the 15,000 customers or million-plus free tier users. And that ultimately allows our engineering team to become more efficient, because now we are spending much more time building new value for customers instead of building 14 different styles of MongoDB for all the different hardware types that sits in some legacy enterprise's data center. We can slim that down, build one version of the software, get all that insight, and test every step of the development cycle. And also, databases is not something people tend to upgrade very often. Usually they upgrade it once a year, once every 2 years. So moving from a cycle where our engineering organization used to ship code once a year, we have this one big conference that we announce all our new stuff at, to now a model where we actually are pushing new capabilities daily or weekly has been a big shift in the organization. And the cool thing about it is we've watched our feature velocity just skyrocket. So most engineering organizations that work largely on a single platform product, the more engineers you add, your velocity tends to slow down, especially on a complicated piece of code like a database. In our case, because of this change, we've actually been able to accelerate as we've added more and more people on a per engineer sort of basis. So that has finally been the piece that has allowed us as a company to really go even bigger. So this past year, what we did is, listen, we're not a single database, single platform product company anymore. Now that we've got a much more diverse distribution strategy with self-service, high-velocity inside selling, large strategic enterprise sales, and we've got this massive funnel where we actually now have information about all the users coming in, we can now invest much more aggressively in a cross-sell strategy of multiple complementary products. And so as we kind of look to be not just the first database company to go public in 26 years, but to be one that lasts for another few decades, a big part of that transformation started off with a little idea from our CTO and the board saying, hey, why don't we build a cloud version of our product? It sounds like that might work. So thank you. That was my story on transforming MongoDB.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.